And the only reason I bring it up is because later I'm going to talk about separation of duties and the silos that we see. So there's been a weird shift over the past 15 years from that whole be a specialist to be a generalist back to be a specialist, kind of like the whole mainframe days, like have it all in one spot in your mainframe, have it distributed, have it in one spot like the cloud. So kind of that same cycle. A lot of what I see from a curriculum standpoint is that specialist track. And security is just a small sliver of what new students are taught. And so you've got a 16-week class on, server or some client OS. You've got maybe half a week devoted to security. And they don't get a whole lot of exposure unless they go down that track themselves. And so it's important to keep that in mind from your own organization standpoint of what do you expect your people to know and what do you expect them to care about? The answer is not, annual security awareness training. It's not watch this PowerPoint, know what these acronyms stand for, take this quiz. It's more than that, It's how do you build it into your job to where you do things securely? And so that's the only reason I draw attention to that here. It's, you'll see later in the presentation that if you've got somebody watching the watchers, do they know what they're watching? And that's an important question to ask. If you've got a security guy that used to be a DBA, he's probably going to be really good at database security. But what about networking? Is he that specialist on all these different tracks? So the idea is not to, create a bunch of polymaths or Renaissance men in the IT realm, but it's, do right staffing and have the right visibility into the types of things that you're asking your organization to do. And then also, I'm a fan of classic rap music, so thank Snoop Doggy Dogg for the Mind on My Money, Money on My Malware. It was almost called Ain't Nothing But a PCI Thing, baby. Thank you, Dr. Dre. Okay, let's look at the agenda. All right, so we're going to look at some recent breaches. One of the breaches that we're going to look at is Target. Even though it's not all that recent, it's only December 2013, but it's one of those where we have enough information about it now that it can kind of serve as that baseline to compare these other ones to. And I'm going to dig into the actual indicators of compromise, or IOCs, of these three examples of malware. But the point is not to understand how this malware worked or works. It doesn't really get you anything. It's that understanding how to look at it or how to look for it is what really is a game changer. And that's the whole point. So, I'm not looking for a, wow, that's neat moment. I kind of want that aha moment where it's like, okay, I can take that and run with it in my organization. You may never see Black POS or Framework POS or whatever, but it's knowing how to look for this stuff is what makes the difference. So does anybody have point-of-sale devices in their environment or clients that have them? Anybody have a hospital or some retail store where it's a very, very public type of place? We've got a lot of people coming in and out. That's the other thing. As we talk through these, I'm going to talk about Target, Home Depot, and Dairy Queen. Public places, And so if you can put that into the perspective of how it operates in your environment, it's important for that context. And then I'm going to look at the prioritized approach. If you haven't seen it before, it's neat. It's something that the PCI Council puts out, and it says, all right, here are the baby steps to achieve PCI compliance. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and neither is what the council is asking anybody to do. There's the self-assessment questionnaire, A through D, and then the report on compliance. But at the end of the day, they all have those similar tracks. So we're going to look at the prioritized approach, compare it to the malware that we analyze in these actual case studies to see what they could have done or what would have worked better, or maybe what's right on paper but what's not operationalized could be the issue. And one thing I wanted to mention, so from a perspective of how important this stuff is or how likely it is to occur, the Verizon data breach report has some really neat trends last year where it showed last year versus everything else. And so point of sale intrusions accounted for 14% of everything, which was up for the entire history prior to that from 1%. So that's a huge jump. Card skimmers went down from 19%, so for that bucket of years, to last year, 9%. And then crimeware dropped from 19% down to 4%. But, you know, crimeware is broad, includes malware, includes phishing. But the thing is that decrease in crimeware, I don't think it's really going to signify that things are going to get easier for us. Especially when we look at this malware, look at the case studies, and talk about some of the controls that are actually available to make our lives easier. Something that may help is the introduction of the EMV chipped cards, so the EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa, where they actually have a chip. And so the thing there is, A, it's going to make the ability to profit off of these cards a lot more difficult. And that's the whole point, really. But if you think about the numbers, so 575 million will be issued by the end of this year, 2015. Only 40% of U.S. debit cards will be replaced, and 70% of credit cards by the end of this year. Compliance deadline is October 2015. But if you think about that, you know, it's not going to be a big bang. It's not going to be all of a sudden, bam, everybo's got them. I mean, not every card is going to be capable of it. Not every single merchant's going to implement them. So there's a transition period. But the thing to think about is put yourself in the shoes of the attacker. What does that deadline mean to the attacker? To me, I think it means a window of opportunity is shrinking. And so that may make me throw my big guns now. You know, if there's a payoff between now and October 15th, that I'm more likely to make millions of dollars off my attack. And the only reason I bring that up is not to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but to be vigilant of the timing of it. If you look at it from the organization's perspective versus the attacker perspective, and kind of play that role. You know, if I was an attacker getting ready to steal millions of dollars, and I saw some safeguard that could prohibit that down the pike, probably going to escalate my timeline a little bit. Well, the thing is, the financial motivation from these attacks is huge. Just last week, I talked to a guy that runs a large data center out west. He had a sysadmin fall prey to a phishing attack, clicked a link, got CryptoWall on his machine, killed their entire infrastructure. The company was losing $11,000 a minute. They paid a $4 million ransom. They said, hey, it's worth it to pay $4 million because we're losing $11,000 a minute. And luckily, the bad guy gave them the encryption key and it unlocked their data. But the thing is, that was not your standard, you know, home user where it's like, hey, give me 1 Bitcoin or $500. That attacker knew what they were doing. I mean, you're not going to go to a home user and say, all right, give me $4 million for pictures of your cat. They knew that that company had the money to spend. And so if you think about it from your organization standpoint, you've got valuable data. And somebody's going to come after it, and you've got more and more targeted attacks. One of the things I'm most worried about is that combination of the insider threat. So you think about that $4 million payday. How hard would it be for me to get somebody hired on at your cleaning crew or a sysadmin job? If somebody approached me and said, all right, Dustin, we're going to give you $1 million. All you have to do is go and get this job at Company X. We're going to take over their environment. We're going to make $4 million. Here's your one. Sorry about the embarrassment of getting fired for clicking on a link. That's tempting, right? And that's the thing where it's, you know, and this guy with that example, I don't know if he actually was in on it or not. You know, maybe a better story if he was. See it in the movies in 2 years. But the thing is, if you think about that, and these laser-focused attacks that are happening, they aren't making a lot of money from the 1 Bitcoin, $500, you know, encrypting your cat pictures. It's the organizations that are willing to pay ransom, or organizations where they can steal data that's valuable. So again, I really think the next few months, up to that October deadline, may be a high time for bad things to happen. So, you know, remain vigilant. Like David's talk before this one, you know, he focused on a lot of things from a monitoring standpoint. I'm going to echo a lot of those of what is, you know, something that can really save you. And then also, I just want to mention from the targeted approach standpoint, How many people are in management or have people underneath them, or they have technical people? One of the things that we keep seeing over and over is profiling via LinkedIn. So if you look at LinkedIn and you say, okay, I want to attack your company. So I look up your company and it's mid-size, got 50 people, and this guy is Windows admin, this guy is a Cisco admin, and this guy runs System X. Well, I've got a pretty good picture of what's happening in your world. So if I know about vulnerabilities or if I have custom malware designed for that type of system, you're a lot easier target. And so it's one of those things to think about, from a policy and procedure standpoint. How much information do you want pushed out on LinkedIn or whatever social media about your organization? And do a time check. Sorry, I didn't mean for the agenda to take 20 minutes. Jeff already told you I've got too much content. All right, so the actual presentation now. We are all targets. I apologize for the tangent. Okay, so again, target is a really good example because it happened long enough ago that we know, kind of the full story and even some of the repercussions. And also it's a great example because I personally was affected by it. That is my letter that I received because my information was stolen. I blame my wife, since she's the target shopper. And so some of the details. 40 million cards were involved, 70 million records, $200 million estimated to cost the banks. All right, so at the time, was Target PCI compliant? Yep. Did they have antivirus? Yep. Did they have file integrity monitoring? Yes. Did they have network security monitoring? Yes. I mean, if they're compliant, that means they passed them all. And so that's the problem. It's, PCI is not the gold standard. Even in the training, they tell us it's the bronze standard. It's one of those things that it's for a specific purpose. But the thing is, it's more prescriptive than most regulatory compliance frameworks. I want to show that there's quite a few things that, from the Target, Home Depot, and Dairy Queen perspective, really could have been avoided with the proper processes in place. Okay, and so from the monitoring standpoint, a third party did alert the appropriate people, and then that alert went back to the mothership, and then nothing. Died on the vine. And so they showed that the process worked to a point, but then stopped. So that's definitely a problem. All right, so here's straight from the PCI DSS, maintain a vulnerability management program. So requirement 5, protect all systems against malware. This one wouldn't have helped them. It's one of those things where they had AV installed, this malware was not detected. And you're going to see that, as more and more of a trend. Again, it's not the shotgun approach from the bad guy perspective. It's, I'm going to be laser focused. I want your information in your organization. How can I get around your controls? So it's not just going to be that generic AV where there's a signature or a DAT file that catches it. So that's where we can't wholeheartedly rely on AV. It's an important thing. It's, that minimum level of protection that you have to have, but it's not going to be a silver bullet. It never has been. I don't think it will be. Okay. All right, regularly monitor and test networks, requirement 10. This is track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. They did have monitoring in place. It was a third-party vendor's credentials that actually let the attacker into the network. So, requirement 8, identify and authenticate access to system components. This one right here, the 8.1.5, enable only during time period needed and disabled when not in use, and then monitor when in use. It makes sense. I mean, that's really easy to say, but how easy is it to actually do? I mean, if you've got a vendor that has to get into your system to do something, whether it be maintenance, whether it be unrelated to IT, if it's an HVAC employee that's to log into some VPN, do you have the time and the resources to A, take that phone call, authenticate who they are, flip the switch and turn it on, but then monitor what they're doing also? Most companies don't. It's just one of those things where it's really hard to actually implement and operationalize. So it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, if they would have done this, They would have been fine. But, it's one of those things where it's really actually hard to implement. Okay, so moving on to Home Depot. I don't blame my wife for this one. I guess maybe I could. She makes me do the house stuff, and I have to go to Home Depot and buy things. But here's a letter that I received November 9th, 2014. And this one was my email address. So still not ideal. Some data was lost. But the details on this one, a little bit different than Target. So 53 million payment cards in the breach. Or, I'm sorry, 56 million, 53 million email addresses. And so same scenario really as Target. So that's what's that, why it's that good baseline. Third-party credentials. And then this one was called Framework POS. They originally thought it was Black POS, the same thing as Target. But there's some, very different things, and I've got a comparison slide later. But again, same scenario. Home Depot compliant, had AV, everything across the board, network security monitoring, the whole deal. And they still had a breach. And so again, PCI DSS, if you follow it, it's probably written there on paper, but the way you operationalize it is a different story. Okay, and then the Home Depot story actually broke on Krebs on security. If you don't read him on a regular basis, I suggest you do. It's always just great stuff. And this is where Home Depot was also alerted by a third party. But it was not their security monitoring company that was actually watching for alerts. It was by the banks. And so, again, it's that outside third party that shouldn't necessarily be involved in the security of your system, having more insight to the people that you pay to be watching it do. That's a scary place to be. And again, we'll do the actual indicators of compromise or the IFCs on all three of the malware shortly. All right, so Dairy Queen, this one I can only blame myself. I didn't receive a letter, amazingly. But, this is one of those where frequently go and travel all over the place to find Dairy Queens. I'm just kidding. All right, so on Dairy Queen, pull this up, back-off malware was what affected Dairy Queen. And this is more of a kind of generic piece of software. You'll see some of the things in the IOCs where, like it shows up as a McAfee service where, if you're going to laser focus something on somebody and they don't have McAfee, you may want to change that to whatever they have. So more generalized, also affected UPS, Goodwill, and then Michael's stores. And so on backoff, some of the research that's been done on the way it behaves. Proper firewall in place, systems being properly updated, would have killed the effectiveness of this. And this is another thing where the PCI DSS, it's got the firewall protection, it has the system update requirements there. It's just these companies were deemed PCI compliant, but what they were actually putting in place from a program or management standpoint wasn't really meeting all the needs. It just wasn't all the way there. And then here is straight from the PCI DSS, developing and maintaining secure systems. And so the vulnerability management program, the whole thing, just from, if you think about the PCI silo of what you need to do, you think about, you scan for vulnerabilities, a CVSS score of 4.0 or more is hit in 30 days, you've got 90 days, you've got the ability to do some risk mitigation or management with compensating controls. If you've got that program put in place in your environment, but it's just on that silo of PCI systems, I'm afraid you may be doing yourself a disservice because the segmentation that we feel like we have, that we put on paper and we say, nope, these things are air-gapped, they can't talk to each other, is usually not as airtight as what we think. And that's where you can't just turn a blind eye to the rest of your network, the non-PCI network. So being diligent about what you have in your house and knowing what should and should not be on there, and then also having a proactive vulnerability management program is a really important piece of the puzzle. And it's not just a compliance step. I mean, it's just securing your data, securing your environment. And so again, the PCI DSS, is a good place to start if you're looking for something that's pretty prescriptive and if you have to be PCI compliant anyways. So use it as a magnifying glass rather than a silo, and say, okay, how can we improve in the rest of our environment? Because again, if that segmentation is not actually in place, isolated, not just, it's got ACLs in place and it can't touch it, actually isolated, something outside of that PCI zone or network could really affect the security. And that's where, I'm afraid we see a lot of holes pop up, the things that aren't managed properly. All right, so let's take a look at the indicators of compromise. So Black POS is, it affected points of sale devices. Some of the access methods were remote access credentials, internet-facing systems, and via botnet. The way data left, ICMP, TLS, HTTPS, SSH, FTP, SFTP. So think about your systems. If you've got a point-of-sale device that is only sending data to process a card, is it happening via FTP? What are you going to do if all of a sudden FTP pops up? Are you even watching it? Or do you say, nope, FTP is disabled, so I'm not going to watch for FTP? That's the problem. It's just because you don't think it's there doesn't mean it's not. It's not the things that you do see that are going to get you. It's the things that you're not looking at. And that's why from the PCI standpoint, it says, look at all security events on a daily basis. That doesn't mean just the things that you've written rules about to suppress and get alerts on. It's the whole deal. And it's, again, hard and tedious, and there's got to be a way to manage it and reduce the actual time spent, but there's got to be some visibility on the stuff that nobody's ever looking at. So somebody needs to be looking at it. These breaches that go on for so long where there's network communications out, if you only expect to see 443 out, then all of a sudden something else is flipped on and talking, that's got to be an alert. That's an incident. Something bad is happening. And so the features on Black POS, scraping memory for track data, self-deletion, system-level log scrubbing. So a lot of things, to not let you find it. But the thing is, if something's changing on your system in the first place, you should have visibility into that. All right, so the actual IOCs, POS.exe to determine what data to scrape. So this is what the malware does. It creates output.txt and it creates DLL files. New applications are in memory, new SMB traffic, new files on the POS in general, and then again, that FTP traffic out. So again, if you know what your system is supposed to be doing and what is installed on your system, and all of a sudden output.txt is created, that's something that should trigger, oh no, something bad is happening in my environment. Especially when it's widespread but not all your machines, where you've got this kind of parsed together. It's just, again, more evidence that knowledge of your system and the way you expect it to look, that baseline, is a really important thing to keep in mind. All right, so framework POS also affected point of sales. Again, remote access credentials, internet-facing systems, and botnet. Exfiltration was the same. One of the features that were different, again, it posed as McAfee. So if you don't have McAfee in your shop, then the sudden appearance of it should be an indicator that something's not quite right. All right, so Framework was initially thought to be Black POS. They both run as a service. So Black POS had the Windows subsystem, while Framework was a console. And so just the way they were written and the way they were behaved was evidence enough that, it obviously wasn't the same thing. And it may not even be from the same group or person, even though some of the other exfiltration methods were similar. And that's the thing, where you can buy this malware pretty inexpensively and modify it yourself. So again, if you work in an environment where there's a lot of data to take out, buy yourself some cheap off-the-shelf malware and get rich. It's a joke. Don't do that. You can take that off the recording, right? All right, and then back off, point of sale also. Access methods were remote desktop. So things like logmein.com. And for exfiltration, it did an encrypted post request. And so from the feature standpoint, scrape memory for track data. It logged keystrokes, command and control communication, and then malicious stub injection. So if you tried to kill it, it came back to life. And this is scary from the keystroke logging standpoint. I see a lot of clients that use the virtual terminal software. So they've got their machine, they pull up a website, and they're keying in cards. And they could do, hundreds a day per person. So multiply that by, 150 call center agents. That's a lot of data. If they are all infected with keystroke capable malware, I mean, that's bad news. And it's not that sophisticated, especially the back off. I mean, it's cheap. It'll install on anything. It's not laser focused. And so it's, again, back to my example, if I'm going to target your company and you say, oh, I manage a call center of 5,000 people and we run Windows XP or whatever, I'm going to say, hey, I want my malware in their house because I'm going to capture all those cards and have it pumped out wherever. And that's the thing, where it's if you're not looking from the workstation standpoint, the point of sale standpoint, anything that's involved in that processing process, then you could have a problem. All right. So here are the back-off IOCs, or the indicators of compromise. And you're going to see there's 3 different versions that we have here. And it's because back-off is that generic malware. It's the one that's probably the easiest to attain. It looks like, from an install standpoint, Adobe Flash, Java, and then Adobe Flash in this other version. So again, ask yourself, do I expect these machines to have Flash or Java? I hope not. But, I mean, if they don't, then this is a definite indicator that something's not quite right. And then, here's the files written, registry keys, and user agents. So these are all things that the malware is introducing into the system. And so from an analyst standpoint, if you're watching this network, or watching these devices, and you've got proper file integrity monitoring or change control enabled, these are the type of things that you're going to say, this doesn't seem quite right. I need to do something. And so, again, it's not about just pure AV or file integrity monitoring or logging and alerting. It's looking at this stuff to make sense of it. Yes, we have to make our lives easier from a machine standpoint or automation standpoint, but there's got to be some thought into what's actually happening. All right, so we've seen the similarities. Now what? It's that concept of always assuming breach. Think about your organization. When there's an event or an incident going on, people are a little different, right? It's not everything's normal. Oh, I didn't look at the logs, did you? When you have a breach situation, everybody's kind of heightened. Everything's under scrutiny all of a sudden. And that's where it will benefit you from a day-to-day standpoint to be able to harness that concept. It changes the mindset. It forces processes to be looked at closer. And the thing is, again, like I've said 15 times now, the malware doesn't matter. Black POS, framework, back off, that's neat that they were able to do it and we can have some visibility into how it worked. But the thing is, it's past now. Then we're not going to know about the next one until after it hits. And that's where that hindsight's 20/20. But it's preparing yourself and your environment to be able to react appropriately. So it's putting the right controls in place and the right processes. Like the Target, where it was actually alerted and went all the way through and then it just stopped. Maybe they had all the right stuff, but there's just a break in communication or a broken process. It's where you've got to hash that out and say, if this type of thing happens, here's how it's going to work. And then you practice it, you test it, and you make sure it works. Because when it actually does happen, even if you are breached, the data that leaves your house can be reduced greatly. And it's still a big deal, but it's not Target, Home Depot, big deal. And again, that malware doesn't matter. Back off, Black POS, framework, your antivirus has a signature for that. But does it have a signature for the next variant of back off? Probably not. And so, again, not to dog on AV, but you can get around it because if there's no signature or DAT file, it's not going to pick it up. Okay, so The prioritized approach, and again, I really like the prioritized approach. I think it's a good thing. It's digestible for organizations. They can look at it and they say, okay, I got to do this first. I have to do this last. Number one, remove sensitive authentication data and limit data retention. Yes, 100% that makes sense. The other thing to think about, though, we always talk about limiting your scope, and I mentioned segmentation and the fact that segmentation isn't always what we think it is. But if you think about being able to limit scope from an exposure standpoint, do you need Flash? Do you need Java? Do you need Office on these devices? Okay. Reducing that software install on these machines in the card data environment reduces your scope. You don't have to deal with the vulnerabilities that are on that piece of software. So number one, this definitely, it makes sense. Number two, from a protect systems and networks and be prepared to respond to a system breach, yes, obviously, it's a really important thing. But if you look at number four, monitor and control access and the breaches that we just talked about, number four is where you're going to manage your vendor IDs and then also file integrity monitoring. So even though you may be prepared to respond to a breach, until you get to number four, you won't know that you were breached, really, or you won't control it well. So my recommendation is not an overhaul of this. It's just use the past breaches to kind of shuffle the prioritization a little bit in your own organization if it makes sense. And say, all right, we know these are our systems and this is how they look. We're going to flip on file integrity monitoring from a Windows or whatever standpoint, and we're going to alert. And we're going to roll this into milestone number two because it's important. And then number three, this is around securing your payment card applications from a development standpoint. Number four, we covered. There's pieces of that I feel should be bumped up to two. And then number five, the physical protection. So I touched a little bit earlier on hospitals, retail stores, all those places. It's really easy to do recon on a retail store. I'm going to pretend like I'm going to buy something. I'm going to walk up to the cashier. What do you have? Okay, let me look at your point of sale device. Let me look at your screen. Oh, I can see your user ID and passwords posted on the monitor, but that's a different story. So, it's easy to step into that and figure out, a lot of what you need to do from a physical standpoint as an attacker. So, again, if you put your attacker hat on and think about your organization, where do you have customer-facing points of contact? From a point of sale standpoint, or even a computer standpoint. To go back on I'm going to go interview for a job in your organization, a lot of times they'll take you into this room. There's two computers there. They bring up a web page. You fill out the application. What's behind that? Think about what your Windows authenticated users can do. Can they browse through, shared directories on the network? Can they get the project files? I've been in a lot of organizations where a generic user ID and password gets me to a lot more information than it should. And so if I can get access to that because I'm going to pose as an applicant for a position, that's something to think about. So again, put your attacker hat on and think about all the ways that you can get into your organization. All right, and that is my presentation. Any questions? I didn't mean to power through the end like that. I was worried about time suddenly. Nothing? No heckling?